Well, look, internationally, the India-Russia relations are the most solid, historical, no conflict of interest, complete support from both sides. And there's a complete consensus in these countries. Now, in India, which is very divided, there's a right, there's a left, there's a center, there's the ordinary people. But you ask anyone on the political spectrum and they say Russia is a part. There's no dispute on that. And it has to continue. So they can talk of India-Pakistan, India-China, but on India-Russia, there is this consensus.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Dr. Anuradha Chenoy, a former professor and dean at the School of International Studies at India's prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University. Anu, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Delighted.
Great having you back, because when we really need to talk about India's foreign policy now that everything is changing. We've just seen the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We've just seen this rapprochement, or we're seeing the rapprochement between India and China. What is your take on this new relationship with your big neighbor to the northeast?
Well, look, of course, the optics have shown that there is a defreeze, which there is. There has been a thaw because Modi has visited China after 7 years. So naturally, it is a major event in international politics, given the fact that international politics is in transition. But there is a lot behind it, a lot behind the timing, a lot behind the process between India and China. There are legacy issues in which, there was a lack of trust because India and China have not been able to really demarcate this very long border that they have. There are differences in perception. These borders were created, of course, by the colonialists, the British. So the Indians see it differently, the Chinese see it differently. And along this border, there have been skirmishes in the past. Sometimes they're low, sometimes they increase. So China uses a kind of politics of pressure, compromise, pressure with India. But India is quite keen to improve relations, but there has been a breakdown of trust. So now, given this major transition, India and China actually started moves to improve their relations in 2024. So it's not an immediate thing that, Trump has sanctions or Modi rushes to China. These meetings have been very carefully prepared. The other thing is India and China, despite their differences, they have set several levels of conflict management. One is a core commanders level meeting on the border, a working mechanism which was set up in 2012. And though Galwan happened, where Indian soldiers were killed and a few Chinese soldiers, even then, in 2023, these core commanders were on the ground there facing each other. They had 23 meetings. So while there was a freeze, this still goes on. But the most important meeting is at a higher level of the national security advisors. That is in India, the NSA, Ajit Doval, and in China, Wang Yi. And in there, before, and I think Mr. Modi was very clear that if he was going to meet President Xi Jinping at the sidelines of Kazan, there has to be some give. And so there was the 22nd round, and only in 2019, and suddenly there was a 23rd round between them in December 2024. And in this, of course, in the press, Modi told the Newsweek, for example, that India-China relations are very significantly, we need to permanently address the issue. The Chinese reacted. But an important date was October 2024, when the Foreign Secretary announced that the border patrol had actually restored the pre-2020 rights in sensitive areas on the border. And he referred to the 4Ds, which have been referred again and again, including in the meetings in 2025. That is disengagement, de-escalation, discussion, and de-induction. So overall, also, if you see international relations and border issues, I think this is a good model also.
And this model was going on even before the current turn with all of these sanctions. So the thaw in relations has a longer history than just like the United States now putting pressure on India.
You're right. It has a longer history, but the difference is it has been speeded up greatly. It's been speeded up because it's clear that the US has strategically downgraded India. It's not just Trump's idiosyncrasies and saying one thing one day and the others. There's an entire structural shift, in my opinion, which is happening, in which there are 4 or 5 points if we divert to why the US has strategically downgraded India. One, of course, it's both the personal and the political and the economic. It's holistic. It's not just the personal that Modi has refused to endorse, the Nobel Prize for Trump, or that he has refused to acknowledge Trump's mediation efforts in the India-Pakistan war. It's more than that, where Trump in his cabinet meeting has said, well, India does more trade with us than we do with them. And that's true. India has a major advantage in what it exports to the US and what it receives. And India does have tariffs. It does protect its agriculture sector because 70% of India's poorest farmers depend on dairy and agriculture. So if they open it to the highly subsidized US dairy and agriculture, it'll be a big blow and there will be a movement against the Prime Minister. So that's one. Second, it's a punishment for BRICS. It's clear now the US sees the BRICS and multipolarity as a threat, and they're seeking to counter it in multiple ways. Third, they believe that they can, damage BRICS with this and pressurize both Russia and China. Maybe give something to China, because they're only negotiating actually with these two countries. The others are sideshows. And also, they don't want India to become another China. After all, the US was responsible by making China a market economy and part of WTO and opening up and transferring manufacturing to this huge scaling up. So they don't want India to do the same. So there are various reasons, and these have come out in various statements.
Although I must say the idea that the United States made China successful is a very Western narrative, isn't it? It completely discards Chinese agency. It's like, oh, all of the mistakes we made and therefore they became rich. Ah, too bad.
Absolutely.
But if we think that this is actually the thinking over there, which I see in several publications, then it makes sense that they would try to have a different strategy toward India. Now, this, however, creates now a huge pressure, of course, for India and China to resolve these petty little disputes. Maybe one more question about the petty disputes, because both countries are huge, humongous, and the border areas we're talking about are long, yes, but the disputed area itself is like a couple of 10, 20, 30 kilometers on each side. It's like, why is it that these border disputes are so difficult to overcome for countries this large? Is it partially also out of the control of the central government, what happens in these areas?
No, I think number one, it's the two nationalisms. The Indian nationalism, which helps governments take power, and the Chinese nationalism, which also has an ecosystem and trolls, etc., who don't trust India and don't want to see China transferring technology and FDI, but India does. And there's a difference in perception, or even on multipolarity. For example, China is pushing for a multipolar world order, which is anti-US hegemony. It's against unilateralism. It's for strategic autonomy. Now, India also gains from a multipolar world order, but it continuously repeats that they also want multipolarity in Asia. And here the relations are very asymmetric. China is 5 times advanced in every sector than India. But at the same time, now if you see, and this is something interesting which I haven't seen it come up in other analysis, if you see Xi Jinping's thought, just like Mao's thought and Deng Xiaoping's thought, he has these 4 global initiatives. One is the Global Development Initiative, which came out in 2021, which is very linked to the UN SDGs. The second is the Global Security Initiative in 2022, which talks about common and indivisible security, and you cannot have security of one state if you do not have security of the other. It's something that you say, something which the Russians say, and 100 countries have endorsed this, supported this, the Africans and many. And the third was the Global Civilization Initiatives, that these great civilizations must be allowed to progress. And the fourth, which just came out in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting from Xi, was the Global Governance Initiative, which talked about sovereign equality, abiding by international law, practicing multilateralism, people-centered approach, and focusing on taking real actions. Now, if they have these huge 4 global initiatives, which they are touting to every meeting, and the overarching conceptualization is, of course, multipolarity, globalization with free trade. So not the American kind of globalization, anti-US hegemony under the UN arch. So not a rule-based order, but a UN-based order. So if you have this rhetoric and you're not getting along with your biggest neighbor, people are going to question that. So it's not that the Chinese are not keen to mend ties. But again, there's an issue about mending ties, because China has repeatedly said, let's forget about the border and go in for economic development. Geoeconomics is very important. The reason is that China has a huge trade with India, $128 billion, of which India has a deficit of almost $100 billion. So they're gaining. But a lot of products India makes, electronics, etc., which it exports again to the US, to the West, the base materials, the downstream, comes from the Chinese, including rare earths. So India also wants that. They want FDI. But at the same time, there are constraints for both to at least repair the relations. But India has held firm, and they said we can give up on that if the border issue is not resolved. That is central to us. And that is why before the SCO meeting, when Wang Yi suddenly came, and mind you, the international events are very interesting in this period. On August 8th, Trump announces 50% tariffs. Then I think August 6th. Then August 8th, he announces that there would be the meeting with the Russians in Anchorage. And on August 14, Wang Yi comes here and announces Prime Minister Modi is going to come before Indians announced it. So he had to give something. And the important thing was that they agreed on peace and tranquility. There was a 10-point consensus between Wang Yi and the Indian National Security Advisor, I think, which is very important because it refers to the earlier agreements, 1998, 2005, where there were agreements, but which were let down. The Indians feel it was let down by them. The Chinese feel, India was joining Quad, they were getting too big and they deserved to, whatever the multiple reasons they had. So when Wang Yi came, there were these changes in the international system, and the Indian foreign minister said 2 important things, which the prime minister later also said, was obviously come from the prime minister office, that differences must not become disputes, and competition must not become conflict. So this is what we argue also as, peace and neutrality people. So, yeah.
Sorry, is it fair to say that what we are seeing is not necessarily the vanishing of these previous disputes, but an agreement on how to manage them? That we now have more systematic or systemic pressure on finding avenues and ways to keep it below the boiling point, and people agree on that? Because to me, that's like the SCO and BRICS are kind of fora to do that. We don't want perfect peace and not perfect harmony, but peace in the sense of managed disputes or managed conflict. Is this more or less where this is headed toward?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So there is a large element of conflict management, but it's also a process. So how it's complied with by both sides will matter. The compliance aspect of what both sides want. Because earlier, there used to be a step forward and a step backward immediately. So there is this, it is a process. But now I think both sides see the need for it, because if you see history of the global south, those countries who've had neutrality, non-alignment, and now it's called strategic autonomy, they have developed more than others who've had war. You can see it in ASEAN, China, India. So strategic autonomy was part of the Shanghai Cooperation meeting, the Tianjin Declaration. So there is this process. So we hope it doesn't go backwards, but no one knows.
No one knows. But I mean, I think India is a very good case to look at, because it's not as hotly contested as, like, let's say, China and the China-Russia relationship. India, I guess, in a strange sense, is more courted, even though what the United States is currently doing is not courtship. It's more the opposite. It's more trying to, tie you down with shackles, and either you agree or you're going to be punished. But still, India itself, Jay Shankar, your foreign minister, has said several times, India will do what's best in the interest of India, which to me also indicates we need to look at what's still happening in the Pacific, right? I haven't heard any talk of India thinking about giving up on the Quad. And giving up on its security ties in the Pacific with the US, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, how do you see that one developing? Have you heard anything in your circles?
Yeah, well, India is not going to give up on Quad, but they would try, and they have military exercises with these partners, but they try and focus on climate. And recently there was a statement on health and these soft issues. So the other thing for sure is that India will never be part of any alliance against China. They do have agreements with the American, the logistics base agreement where the US ships can dock and have their logistics, etc. But they will not take sides. They just cannot afford it, and they've said it. And the other thing is on Taiwan, which is a sensitive issue. India has always said they believe in the one China policy. Now, since a couple of years, they've stopped repeating it because China, they have these stapled visas for people from Arunachal Pradesh, which they claim is theirs. So India stopped repeating it. But in the last meeting when Wang Yi came, this came out very clearly. Wang Yi said that Jaishankar has said that they believe in the one China policy, but Jaishankar said, we've only said that our position is not changed and that we have some amount of relations with Taiwan, just like other countries, including the Chinese, have.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. I mean, why would you want to somehow indicate that you have a strong stance when even the partner China has actually, trade relations and everything, right? So, but it's in this sense now we are one more question, like what we've seen over the past 10 years or so was very much Asia Pacific focused, to the point where a lot of especially US scholars and European scholars also start talking about Indo-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific strategy and blah, 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 blah. A lot of this was centered around the idea of a maritime space that needs management from the Western side, from the American side specifically, right? But what we're seeing at the SCO and also to a lesser extent, but still with BRICS, is to me resembles now a continental push of developing foreign policy. I mean, especially the SCO. What is your impression on this continental versus maritime discussions of geopolitics?
Yeah, again, you're right, because what the US has done, they have lattice-like agreements with many countries in the Asia Pacific, with the Philippines, with Korea, with Japan, and with some of the islands, and they're pushing it. But the scene has changed. One, because of China's great power projection. Second, the Russians are saying they are an equally important Pacific power, which they are with Vladivostok. And they have this Vladivostok-Chennai, South India, corridor, which is active with maritime trade. And no ship has been bothered by the Chinese, which has gone across. So, it's this, there is another quad, and that quad is the Russia, India, China, and maybe sometimes Iran, sometimes not. These are informal agreements, but there are possibilities which India also uses, as does China. And other thing, I don't think that China will take Taiwan militarily. They do not want a war, but if the US takes any step, they will show their capacity. As you know, Deng Xiaoping's hide your capability, bide your time. That's what they've done.
Yeah, I think so too. There's no appetite for a war unless it is inevitable. So the question is, will the other side push to the inevitable or not? But let me also ask then about India and Russia, because that's the other interesting thing, right? India, in a sense, was forced to take a stance to say like, no, we stand we do not stop our import of Russian oil. Maybe just on the one hand, it's an insult to ask that in the first place, but on the other hand, Russian oil at the moment is just too important. And then we also see the development with the new Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. And there's some talk. I mean, some people speculate that in the distant future, this could reach all the way down to India and help supply India with Russian oil. Do you see such a move as well going on? And how do you interpret India's stance on the oil?
Well, look, internationally, the India-Russia relations are the most solid, historical, no conflict of interest, complete support from both sides, and there's a complete consensus in these countries. Now, in India, which is very divided, there's a right, there's a left, there's a center, there's the ordinary people, but you ask anyone on the political spectrum and they say Russia is a partner. There's no dispute on that, and it has to continue. So they can talk of India, Pakistan, India, China, but on India, Russia, there is this consensus. Second, it's, yes, oil is very important. And even in today's newspaper, the Indian Oil Corporation said, the flow is going on as well. But I also saw a statement which said that India has reduced Russian oil by a small percentage and increased buying American oil by 124%, which means that they are trying to make concessions to the US also. India can absorb both the Russian and the US oil. And mind you, it was Janet Yellen who told India that, yes, continue buying Russian oil because it stabilizes oil prices. So India does not only buy Russian oil. India has huge investments in Siberian oil fields. Huge. Siberia 1, Siberia 2, the ONGC, the Oil and Natural Gas Commission of India, they have people permanently there. And then they're buying it in their local currency. So the Reserve Bank of India has given Russia and they have the system called Vostro, where these banks, the foreign banks, get a license to trade in their own currency. And every week, one other bank in the world is getting that license. So, and Russia, of course, was the first, because during the Indo-Soviet period, there was, the rupee-ruble trade, which saved India's foreign exchange. And India saves billions on account of it. And the Reserve Bank of India's chairperson has said this. He said, it would be devastating. Why should we stop our growth? Because what is America ultimately giving? Yes, we are trading with them, but today it said it's a kind of, if they block and put these tariffs, it'll be like less than 2% of their trade. It doesn't matter. It will get impacted. So they can take the hit. The other thing with Russia is that for years, they were the main defense exporters. I think you mentioned history and that people forget. There was a long period of India-American antagonism. It started in the 50s when India refused to join the SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, the CENTO, the Central Treaty Organization, which Pakistan did. They used Pakistan as the base. They tried to hyphenate Pakistan and India, which they've done again. Trump has done it after 25 years. And then India supported the Bangladesh struggle in 1971. The US sent its 7th Fleet into the Indian Ocean as a threat, but India didn't bother, and Pakistan got split into two, something for which they've never forgiven India. So there's been a history of bad relations with China, which started improving only in the late 1990s. So these, what everyone says, last 25, 30 years at most. And now these can go into some, they can be calibrated. India will hedge, they will leverage, but they don't want to ruin their relations. That's what strategic autonomy is. And some Indian commentators say that, India is dependent on Russian sanctioned oil. They're dependent on US technology, which Navarro said, we're not wanting to send any technology to India, but on Indian exports to the US. And they're going to be dependent on Chinese FDI, which hasn't come in that way, but there is trade and there is talk. So this whole process is going on at various levels.
So are we actually witnessing, the end of the United States structural power in India, but in the global South in general? Because I think 20 years ago, 25 years ago, had the United States said tariffs and sanctions and so on, only the most diehard of countries wouldn't have followed. I mean, one of them was North Korea, the other one was then Iran, but others would have had to comply in a sense. And we are already at a place where the options to say like, okay, fine, then not, is now here, isn't it?
Absolutely correct. Because 25 years ago, when the Soviet Union collapsed and they were seriously in a bad place, but India did not stop importing Russian defense equipment. In fact, Moscow and Petrograd, the two cities, depended on these imports for several years. So they were very grateful to India. The balance had shifted. And India started negotiating with the US and wanting more trade. The Indian strategic elite overall is very pro-US. Their children study there. You see everyone. They're dependent on the H-1B visas. But currently, there's a rise of racism also, a decline in the number of visas being given. So overall. But at the moment, this is precisely what you said. They have the options. They have the options which are opening every day of telling the US, if you don't take our exports, we would, like Brazil has done. They've sent their coffee to China. So China hasn't opened up in the same way to India as yet, but they're watching. And India can do it to South Asia, Southeast Asia. And they, but of course, it's not easy to change the supply chains, the value chains, the logistics. But India has learned a lesson that they have to diversify. They cannot blindly trust the US, which they had started doing because they really wanted to shift. They never wanted to become a junior partner because the US doesn't have partners. They have client states. All of them, including, I think, Europe. It's like
absolutely. I mean, the biggest client of them all is like a satellite at this point. It's not just a client. It's if you saw that meeting in the White House where these eight leaders were sitting in front of the desk of the boss, that was an insane picture.
And it's rotating on the on the media, social media all the time.
So in India, just a question, in India, did that picture go around? Did people perceive, oh, Trump really humiliated the Europeans? Was that perceived?
Yes, he humiliated the Europeans. He humiliated Zelensky, to which I think many Indians were quite okay with, because he was very humble and equal with Putin. They watched that also, the Anchorage meeting. And Putin was brought back. As it is, he's close to all of the Russians call the global majority, not just the global south, because but he brought Putin at an equal playing field. But we don't know really whether this will continue given Trump's own increase in sanctions and arms, etc. But the Russians, I think, I went there some time back, and I think they're very clear that they have to fight this alone, and they will fight. It's an existential war, and they are ready to fight it. And there's support for Putin, no matter what the West says, and their economy seems so far to be doing okay. So they're also, increasing they promised a lot of things to India. More oil, more tech transfer of technology, joint ventures. Putin is going to come in December, and you're going to see India sign a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union. So not just Russia. So the Eurasian Economic Union, that Jaishankar said the framework of that has been agreed to. So just the signing remains on the little bits, in which, opposite to what the US has done, Russia has said Indian agricultural goods can be exported to Russia. So they're not saying we will export our agriculture and you can continue having your tariffs, but you can export your agriculture. They could also see Indian labor going to Russia, which India wants. So India wants a lot also, but they have to smoothen the process. There are issues between the two, banking, MOUs, etc. But it's on the table.
What do you think India's approach toward the EU is or will be? Because there's all of this talk that the 19th sanction package that the EU is now working on will contain secondary sanctions to follow the US lead, and actually also put sanctions on India if India doesn't stop oil imports, which would be even more ridiculous than usual, because it's the EU that buys the oil from India, right? But just this is just speculation. We don't know whether this comes for sure or not. But if any such moves should come from the Europeans, how do you think that India would react to that?
Well, look, Trump has put pressure. He said to the Europeans that you have to put secondary sanctions on the Indians. So it has come from the topmost level. But if Europe does that, it will be very negative, because every day they're negotiating the EU-India free trade agreement. Even yesterday, their delegations all the time, they're stuck on various things because India doesn't want intervention in their sovereignty and human rights and social clauses and opening Indian dairy to European dairy. But the negotiations are on, and they're hopeful that they would sign it. And it's possible, but they will not accept sanctions on oil. That can stop this European free trade agreement with India, or at least put a bit of a block on it. It can be delayed even further. As it is, they've been negotiating for some 12 years.
Right.
So
right.
India's in no hurry.
So in a sense, India is not in a bad position to actually wait it out and also just give it more time, because one of the things we see from the United States is that they constantly try to put pressure, right? It's like deadline after deadline after deadline, and they do that, and they also try to pick one country at a time and do everything bilaterally, whereas Indian strategy together with the BRICS and SCO seems to be to go the multilateral route, which is one of the things that makes many commentators hopeful about this part and make me despair about the other one, because there's just more option in multilateralism to create structures that are useful.
Yes, absolutely. And some, U.S. Advisors to the Trump administration, like Navarro, who's been at it every day, saying, being very pretty abusive towards India. He has said, some of them have said India will come crawling back in 3 months, because it will impact our medium and small scale industry. Already, a lot of them, especially in textiles, gems, polishing. India does 80% of diamond polishing of the world. And a huge amount of textiles. And these are all done by small scale industries, and a lot of women are employed. And the shrimp industry, the seafood industry, which, India dominates that sector because the processing is so complex and you have low wages for the labor and women labor do it. So there is pressure on India. They will suffer. But what has been suggested, and the Indian Planning Commission is looking into it, is that they will stop taxing those sectors, subsidize them till the negotiations are complete, and look for economic ways out to cushion the hurt, which it can definitely cause, and it is causing. So it's not that India is, hunky-dory and they can do without it. After all, it is $100 billion of trade, but of that, Trump has given exemptions to some which America needs, like pharmaceuticals. The US will have no medicines if they put sanctions on Indian medicines. It'll hurt the American consumer. All these, the apparels, the shoes, the computer parts, the Apple phones. India's not anywhere near China, but they're pretty big, as it is for a lot of key sectors. So, of course, those will hurt, but they'll have to see what to do.
Right. And are there any, maybe as a last thing to cover, like the security sphere, is there any worries about interventions on whatever level it is? Because we've talked about this before, right? In India's immediate vicinity, we've seen these color revolution type kind of regime change operations from Sri Lanka to Bangladesh, and what was the third one?
Pakistan.
Yeah, Pakistan as well, of course, already quite a bit ago,
Yeah.
more than 3 years ago. But Imran Khan being basically ousted by the military, and we've seen this happening, and we know there's at least some, if not a hand, then at least the pressure from the US involved in people going away that are not in line. Is there still concern within India that something might be looming?
There is concern because you can see from the shift in Trump's foreign policy, where he's made a lot of gestures towards the Pakistan army chief, who basically controls Pakistan foreign policy and not their prime minister, where he has, number one, said they're a partner in counter-terror strategies, meaning Iran and the Middle East and Central Asia. They're a very good base for US policies. They've done it before. And India has always been worried about that. The fact that Trump is coming back to Afghanistan, he's coming back into Central Asia.
Back to Afghanistan? I didn't catch
in a
that.
sense that, you see, Russia and China, Russia has recognized the Taliban. China has that Belt and Road, they're extending the spec, the corridor with Pakistan to Afghanistan. And there is a possibility, there are voices which say that the US cannot just let Afghanistan become a base for Russia and China and the Islamic forces, because that's what it has been. It's a geostrategic area. And so Trump will not do a direct military base or recognition, but definitely the CIA and the British, etc., will be active in this region. And I think India knows that. So, and they are worried that there would be a second war with Iran. And, and lastly, I just want to tell you, if you look at the Shanghai Cooperation Tianjin Declaration, I think it's quite important. Because number one, it says they will establish the SCO Development Bank. So that's on the card. There has been conversation about it, and this will coincide with the new development bank of the BRICS and maybe the Asian Infrastructure Bank of the Chinese to some extent. Second, that the observers in the SCO and the dialogue partners, that merges, so it becomes bigger. They've all become dialogue partners. Then they strengthen cooperation in the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. They develop a partnership in agriculture, commerce, and and tourism and medicine. That's a very big sector of collaboration. Then they strengthen scientific and technological achievements and innovation. So India will use the rhetoric trap that you've said this, now give us some technology, and so will others. And they said they would cooperate in the sector or to promote the North-South corridor, which goes through Iran, and the East-West corridor, which is the BRI, and maybe have some linkage between them. And I think very important in the field of disarmament, because that's not been there in that much in earlier documents, is that they say that they're committed to non-proliferation. They are in call for full compliance with the Convention on Chemical Weapons and full compliance with the NPT. So these are small steps towards disarmament, which they're talking about. And they've also expressed some willingness to cooperate in the military sphere. They have condemned terrorism and double standards. So the overall arch, as I said right in the beginning, is one, strategic autonomy, but each country has its own vision of its strategic autonomy. Multipolarity, where again there are differences, but there are also commonality. There is a UN-based international order, and there is absolutely no going back to unilateralism and unipolarity.
Yeah, and a black and white world. And maybe just to finish with Pakistan, like, the SCO has both members, India and Pakistan, right? I mean, do you know any way, in any way, shape or form, how the dialogue within the SCO between these two states functions, right? Like just a few months after having fought a war. Is this also helpful on that front in order to at least manage ties a little bit?
No, I wouldn't say so right now, because India has been very hurt with this terrorism. India has right-wing nationalist Hindu government, and Pakistan is a sore. So unless Pakistan gives up their idea that that they want to take back Kashmir is a complete no-no for them. So the relations with Pakistan remain bad, if not frozen. And there are no such mechanisms like there have been with China, because India sees its relations with Pakistan as asymmetric. But it seems Pakistan has been able to leverage its relations with the US and with the Chinese quite well. Imran Khan wanted to leverage relations with the Russians just the day before he was imprisoned, and that was one of the reasons that he was put into jail, and he's still there. Pakistan has gone in for I think the 23rd rescheduling of the IMF debt. The floods have impacted them very deeply, so there are a lot of issues, and India is in no mood to help them out at the moment.
Yeah, that's too bad. I mean, regional cooperation would help, but of course, wherever there's a sore spot, there's those who try to profit of the hurt. But this was very insightful, Anu. People who want to read more from your analysis, which pages should they go to?
Well, I write very regularly in this Indian Asian journal called the Economic and Political Weekly. And I write for some newspapers. So if they Google my name, many articles do come out, and they can always write to me and I can send it to them. Some of them are open source and some are, you have to subscribe, but I'm open to sending them some articles.
I'll put the links into the description. Everybody check out Anuradha Chenoy's work. Anu, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Pascal. It's always a pleasure to have this discussion. It actually helps me rethink also.